Hey, what up, guys? This is Ryan with Brainstorm. So this is one of those topics, tax and tips, that's like absolutely relevant to real life, right? Sometimes math can feel a little bit out there, but this topic is definitely relevant. And so when you're looking at the cost of something, anything you want to buy in a store, typically there's tax. And sometimes if you're in a restaurant, you pay two things. You pay tax and tips. And really the only way to think about it when you're calculating these is this. If you want to find the cost of something, you have to think of them as two total separate things. So I'd say, like, for example, the total cost of anything is the cost, on the actual price tag, plus separately the tax. And if you keep them separate in your mind, you can look at this and figure it out and then separately calculate the tax. And then maybe if you're in a restaurant or somewhere where you have to tip, that's yet a third thing. And once you calculate them separately, then you would add them all together and then you're cool, right? And so let's look at an example. First, we'll do a bunch where you're just doing cost plus tax. Like if you're buying something in a store, you're not in a restaurant, you're going to buy a shirt or you're going to buy a wiffle ball bat or whatever, anything, right? And so this is what it would look like. All right, and so maybe here's your scenario. You're like, oh, that's a pretty nice looking shirt and it's $40, right? And then, you tell your mom, you're like, or whoever, you're like, oh, perfect. I'm going to buy this shirt for $40 and that's exactly how much I have. And they're like, well, bummer, you don't have enough money. And you're like, what are you talking about? The price tag says $40. Don't forget, you have to add tax, what's called a sales tax. And, I chose the random number that the sales tax is 8% because every state's different. I think some states don't even have sales tax. So let's admit that the sales tax varies from state to state and all that, probably country to country. So we're just going to use 8% as a rough number. It's pretty close to what it is in California. So now you're like, well, bummer, let's calculate how much this actually costs. The first thing, which is the price or the cost, is just $40. So that's a no-brainer. That one's done, right? That's how much it costs before tax. Now the tax you have to calculate. Now this is the trick. We agree that the tax is 8%. Well, 8% of what, right? 8% of how much? It's always 8% or the percentage times the cost. So this separately would be $40, the cost, times 8%. You don't write 8% in here. You have to change this to a decimal. And don't forget, the way to change a percent to a decimal is move it 2 places to the left. So this would be 0.08. So now I can do this math. I can multiply these two numbers. Whatever I get, I'm going to add to 40, and that is my total price. So doing this, multiplying this, I used a calculator. You can either do it the long way or use a calculator. This came out to 320. So now I know I have my shirt, 40, plus my tax, 320, would be 43.20, and that's my total out the door price of the shirt, right? So again, if you treat them separately, they make sense. So let's do one more where we do cost and tax, and later we'll worry about tip. Okay, maybe this one's like a big ticket item, like a car, right? Like I'm feeling, pretty rich. I painted houses for the last 3 summers and I saved all my money or whatever. And now I have $12,000-ish to buy a car. So I see a cool car and I'm like, that's the one, man. I'm buying that car. And it's 12 grand. But then someone reminds me, don't forget, you have a sales tax on that car of about 8%. We agree. All right, so then, and they want to know, and I want to know, well, hey, what's my total cost, right? So that's going to be equal to the actual price, the cost, so 12,000, right? That doesn't change at all. Plus, separately, my tax is 8%. 8% of what? 8% of 12,000. And don't forget, of literally means time. So then I would say, well, okay, well, 8% of 12,000 is 12,000 times 8%, which I know is 0.08. Okay, and then it's simple, whatever. We'll just multiply here and add it to 12,000. And in this case, it comes out to a much bigger number, which makes sense because 8% of a larger number is a larger amount. So now I have 12,000 plus tax of $960, right? So adding those together, I get $12,960 for my new pickup truck that I have always dreamed of buying. So it's pretty easy. There's some shortcuts that people teach you about finding the total cost, which is the cost plus tax. Don't do any shortcuts or weird things. Treat them as totally separately. Now, unfortunately, for like a restaurant scenario, if you're going to like go on your first date, you're going to have 3 things. You're going to have to find the cost, plus the tax of that cost, plus the tip, right? And I'll show you how to calculate that. Okay, and so here's a scenario. So you're like, okay, so there's a really nice place, downtown, and you take your best friend or your first date or whatever, and the meal comes out to $58, and you're like checking in your pocket, and you got a bunch of wadded up cash, and you're praying that you have enough for the tax and the tip. And so one thing that's important is the sales tax, or I'll put sales up here. The sales tax is determined by your state or city or whatever, and it doesn't change, right? So I keep saying 8%. Where you live, it could be 7.25. Who knows? But it doesn't change. Yeah, so this 8% we're going to call, that's the sales tax of our area. But the tip, this is weird. Okay, so my meal, it looks like it's 58, right? My sales tax I know is 8% no matter what, but the tip varies, and I put 20% here to be cool. Is it true that the tip has to be 20%? No. 15% is a common tip. Or maybe the waiter was really mean and glared at you and gave you extra vegetables, and so you want to give 5%. Or maybe the waiter was the best person in the world and you want to give 40%. This tip thing is completely up to you. I chose 20% because it's a pretty common, excellent tip. This is a very good tip, and it's not totally uncommon. But either way, so now we're going to figure out this cost. So, okay, so the meal was 58 bucks. That's a fact. That was the cost of the meal. But I know now I have to add tax, 8%. 8% of what? 58. Right, so I have the 58 times 0.08. Don't forget to put it in decimal. Now plus a third thing, right? Now I have to calculate the tip. This is an interesting question. Is it 20% of 58 or 20% of whatever this adds to? That's an age-old debate. And for the sake of this lesson, okay, drum roll, listen carefully, we're just going to calculate 20% of just the cost of the meal, forget sales tax. That makes the math easy too. So now for my tip, I have 58 bucks times 20%, which move it 2 places and you get 0.20 or 0.2. Now I do this multiplication, and then I just add 3 numbers. So this first one, 58 times 0.08, looks like it comes out to about $4.64. And this other one would come out to $11.60, right? And now that's easy. So I have 3 separate things. I found the cost, which they gave me. I calculated my tax, 8% of the cost, and then I found my tip, 20%, because I'm a generous tipper, right? And then the final, of course, to this whole thing is you just add all 3 numbers, which would come out to, let's see, should be 74.24, right? And then I rummage through my pocket and I have 4 crumpled up 20s, so I have enough money for the meal. Wouldn't that be embarrassing if you were short like $5? So that's it. There's more math when you have a meal. Let's do one more meal to show, but they're pretty straightforward. I don't think this is that hard once you get the handle of, what sales tax is. You can calculate it quickly, and more importantly, finding the tip. Okay, for this last one, okay, again, we're having a meal with a couple friends or whatever, and it comes out to 84 bucks, right? And so we're going to find the same thing. We're going to find our total cost, and sales tax is 8%. This time the waiter was like, kind of mean, like, it was like very surly. So I'm not going to tip 20% like I normally do, but 15% is still good, and that's average, so that's okay. That still makes sense for a decent tip. All right, so let's calculate this sucker. So the first thing, 84 doesn't change. That's the cost of the meal flat out with nothing included. Now I have to find the tax. Of course, it's going to be 84 times, and you're used to this, so this would be 0.08 plus, and now I have 15% of what? Of the original meal, so now I have 84. Maybe I'll put this in parentheses too. 84 times, remember, move it 2 places, that's 0.15. And then simple multiplication, whatever, calculator, or do it the long way, you should get something like this. Right, this would come out to about $6.72, and your tip comes out to about $12.60, which makes sense. The tip is more because the tip is a higher percent, right? Okay, now adding these 3 numbers, our final bill, total cost would just be around, so somewhere around 103 and 32 cents, something like that. So that's it. It's not intimidating. When you're a kid, it's really scary because you go in to buy something and it says, $20, and then when the guy rings you up, it's more than $20, and you're like, wait, how'd that happen? What happened? Now you get it. There's always sales tax on everything you buy, and it's pretty easy to find out. You can just do 8% of the cost and calculate it yourself, especially if you have a phone with you. It's so quick to do 0.08 times that and find your sales tax. Same thing with tip. All right, you guys, that's it. And honestly, do this. Next time you're out with your family or whatever, start to do these calculations. It's pretty cool. You can pretty much nail it right on the spot. All right, good luck, you guys.